Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be talking about 26 ways you can beat depression naturally. So we'll be going through a series of tips of how you can beat your case of depression using natural methods. All the information is linked in the description and it is written in the description. So if you want to skip the video and just quickly read the information, you can do that, though I will provide some added context in this video. So let's get started with the presentation, beginning with risk factors for depression. Females are at 2 times risk of depression. 21% of people with substance use disorders also experience depression. That's 3x increased risk if you have a substance use disorder. Medical illnesses are linked to depression, with heart disease 2x risk, cancer 4x risk, schizophrenia 4x risk for depression. I will note that the average rate of depression is about 8%. That's the average rate when there isn't a pandemic. During the pandemic, that went up to around 24%. So the pandemic caused a spike in depression levels, and that should be coming down now. But a lot of people, about 1/4 of people in society, experienced depression during the pandemic. What is depression? It's higher brain inflammation leads to depression. The part of your brain that detects and processes negativity gets larger. So the more you think negative thoughts, the bigger your brain region that processes negative thoughts gets, and the more negative things you see, and it becomes a negative feedback loop or a positive feedback loop of negativity. So do be careful of that. Depressed people are more likely to develop other health issues. So if you are depressed, you're more likely to be obese, you're more likely to get all kinds of things. And actually taking care of the reverse is also true. If you take care of your health conditions, your depression will often get better also. So your mental conditions will get better if your physical conditions improve. Sometimes, because the brain region that processes negativity gets larger, sometimes you need something to jolt you out of being in a rut. You need to jolt out of the rut, and then you can function normally once you're jolted out of the rut. But some people really dig a hole for themselves in that reinforcing of negativity process. So that's what depression is. That's the risk factors. Now we're going to go about curing it. And the first thing you can do is exercise. So you don't have to read all of this. I will highlight the important parts. So they measured remission at 16 weeks. 60% of the exercise group were in remission at 16 weeks. 68% of the medication group were in remission at 16 weeks, and 65% of the combination medication and exercise group were in remission at 16 weeks of treatment. At the 10-month follow-up, so 10 months of treatment, this is where things get interesting. 70% of the exercise group were improved and in remission, whereas only 48%, less than at the 16-week mark. If you take antidepressants long term, their effectiveness tends to go down in this study, and only 48% were in remission. And in the combination group, 54% were in remission. So exercise plus an SSRI was less effective than just exercise, where 70% of people were in remission. Very interesting. Some more things you can do. Magnesium. You should be taking a magnesium supplement. 50% of adults are deficient in magnesium. You're not getting it through your diet. Supplementation was 68 to 88% effective in deficient adults. This means almost 30% of the depression cases out there are related to a magnesium deficiency. Take some magnesium. It has to cross the blood-brain barrier, so do not take magnesium biglycinate. You'll have to take magnesium L-threonate or magnesium citrate is what I take, but the neuromagnesium is magnesium L-threonate, which is more effective at crossing the blood-brain barrier, but biglycinate does not cross the blood-brain barrier. So try and avoid that, which is a common magnesium supplement that helps with restless leg syndrome, but your brain also needs magnesium. All right, next thing, curcumin. Curcumin helps with brain inflammation. It's slightly less effective than an antidepressant, only slightly, but much safer. So I consider trying some curcumin. Sauna. Sauning, the Finnish, it's almost a national pastime in Finland to take saunas, leads to a 50% reduction in your symptoms of depression. A Mediterranean diet. 4% of people on a Mediterranean diet had depression versus 11.2% not on a Mediterranean diet. That's a 3 times difference, 300%. So that's a 66% reduction in depression. If you go on a Mediterranean diet, Mediterranean diets are great for you. If you're on a Mediterranean diet and you're eating at least 3 tablespoons of olive oil a day, 1 tablespoon, 9% reduction in your mortality, all-cause mortality. 3 tablespoons of olive oil a day, a 31% reduction in all-cause mortality, 51% reduction in cancer, 46% reduction in heart disease. So a Mediterranean diet is good for you and will make you live longer as well as being happier while you're living longer. So isn't that interesting? And here it is, a 31% improvement in another meta-analysis. So the top line there was one study. They did a meta-analysis, and it was a 31% improvement to depression. And the top line, it was a 66% improvement. So depending on the study, the effectiveness varies. The next thing you can do, this one is kind of an oddball one. It's a exciting field. You've all heard of your microbiome. What lives in your gut, the bacteria that live in your gut can affect your mental health. Helminth therapy is intestinal symbiotic worms. Humans evolved with worms often in their gut. There are 2 worms that typically inhabit the guts of humans in sub-Saharan Africa. They used to inhabit the gut of Europeans, but Europeans have killed off all their intestinal worms. But there are 2 types that generally infect humans, Na and TOS, which is the human whipworm and another worm I've forgotten. But Helminth therapy has shown to provide great benefits and is about 90% effective in reducing your symptoms of depression. The human whipworm, Na and TOS, were not the most effective worms and did not provide depression relief. But there are other symbiotic worms that did provide relief. So just as your gut has good and bad bacteria, symbiotic worms can be good or bad. So the ones that is most effective is HDC, the rat tapeworm. The rat tapeworm, this tapeworm is amazing. It has all kinds of healing benefits. A little bit gross, but it has all kinds of healing benefits, and it provides on average a 90% reduction to your symptoms of schizophrenia, or sorry, your symptoms of depression, and the study will be linked below. So consider trying the rat tapeworm. The next thing you could do, light therapy. Light therapy, this line here is placebo. This line here is medication. This line here, C, is light therapy. And the orange line is a combination of an SSRI and light therapy. This light therapy was used in people without seasonal affective disorder. So these people were not people who normally get depressed in February and March due to the lack of sunlight. These were people who just had depression without seasonal affective disorder. And light therapy reduced symptoms of depression by about 45%. So consider doing sitting under a full spectrum light or going out and getting some sunshine. But as you'll see in the next slide, vitamin D, supplementing with vitamin D is extremely effective. 58% of suicidal patients had low vitamin D, which increased pro-inflammatory markers. Vitamin D levels below 20 nanograms per milliliter had an 85% increased risk of depression compared to those with a level greater than 30 nanograms per milliliter. Supplementing vitamin D led to large improvements. I will put exactly how large the improvements, if I can find it, below in the description. Low folate. Another thing you can celebrate. Folate is B9. Folate leads to a 3x risk of depression if you have low folate. After supplementing folate, suicide ideation decreased by 40% and feelings of depression decreased by 36%. Methylfolate supplementing methylfolate decreased symptoms by 72% in another 6-week study of people over 60, and by 47% in another 4-week study. In another study, supplementing methylfolate was found to be more effective than an antidepressant without the bad antidepressant side effects. In treatment-resistant depression, 19% achieved remission using folic acid plus an SSRI, whereas 0% were being treated effectively before. Using methylfolate and an SSRI in another study, 32% achieved remission versus 14% just taking the SSRI. So it doubled the effectiveness, but you do not need to take it with an SSRI. You can just take it by itself and get that 47 or 72% reduction in your symptoms of depression. Another thing you can do to beat your depression, beat it for good, keto. You can go keto. Keto reduces depression by 70% in persistent, severe depression cases. Keto will wallop that depression away. So consider going on a keto diet. And psychoactive medications were reduced in 18 of 28 subjects who went on a keto diet. 64% of them reduced their psychoactive medications, and their non-psychoactive medication was reduced in 71% of patients. Stuff like metformin, high blood pressure, also was improved on the keto diet. More things you can do. Fish oil. Fish oil helps with brain inflammation, and your brain is built with omega-3 fats along with other fats. So it helps your symptoms of depression. I do not know how much. Fish oil pills store better than a bottle. So use fish oil pills. They do not oxidize and they keep longer. Another thing you can do is S-adenosine same E, which is as effective as an antidepressant with much less side effects. So that's one more thing you can do. Michaela Peterson cured depression. Another thing you can do with the carnivore diet. 48% of mental illnesses resolved on the carnivore diet. 48% improved and 4% were unchanged. No mental illnesses got worse in this study of thousands of people who did the carnivore diet. And this is for all mental illnesses, not specific to just depression, but it does help depression. It worked for Jordan Peterson. It worked for Michaela Peterson, who got Jordan Peterson to do it. It may work for you too. Another thing you can be careful about is low cholesterol. If your cholesterol is too low, it causes much higher levels of violent suicide attempts. And actually, even though heart risk is higher with high cholesterol, all-cause mortality from any cause is lower if you have high cholesterol. So even though heart risk goes up, other causes of death go down if your cholesterol is high. And your brain is made up of, you guessed it, a lot of cholesterol. So consider keeping your HDL cholesterol high. Your LDL cholesterol maybe can be a little more higher than you think it can be. And other things that you can do, an SSRI. I do not recommend. Don't recommend an SSRI. Without antidepressants, 20 to 40% of people improve. With an antidepressant, 40 to 60% improve. So there's still 60 to 40% of people who do not improve with an SSRI. It is only more effective than placebo in 51% of randomized trials, according to another meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. 56, this top statistic was from the National Institute of Health. So antidepressants aren't as effective as you think they are. They provide you a jolt sometimes to help you get out of a rut, but really it is up to you to make decisions in your life to keep yourself healthy. And diet, supplements, and psychological interventions all play a big part in that, along with exercise. Another reason you probably don't want to take an SSRI is because it makes you impotent. You can't have sex. A lot of people on an SSRI cannot have sex. And it dulls your emotions. So you have a flat emotional effect. You don't get happy. You don't get sad. You're just kind of monotone, Mr. or Mrs. Roboto going through life. Whereas people not on an SSRI experience this wonderful world of emotions that sometimes drive us a bit bonkers. Another reason you shouldn't take an SSRI is 56% of people taking an SSRI experience withdrawal effects when they try to quit, with 46% experiencing severe withdrawal effects. So your doctor might tell you do not crave, it's not addictive, you do not want to take an SSRI when you don't have one. But at the same time, if you don't get your SSRI, you often experience terrible things. So it's not a positive thing, you're not craving it, but you do want to take it because it is causing and preventing you from getting severe withdrawal effects. So it's not per se habit forming, but you do become habituated to it. And in a sense, I would say 56% of people are addicted to their SSRI because they cannot live without it. Whereas if you do exercise, if you take a different diet, or if you take some vitamin D or some light therapy, these effects are much more benign. You do not end up being in a situation where you require to continuously buy pharmaceuticals to get by in your life. So similar to an SSRI is St. John's wort, which is a natural way you can get rid of your depression. If you want to take an SSRI, consider taking St. John's wort or 5-HTP or tryptophan, which are serotonin precursors, which are effective at raising your serotonin, which is the same thing an antidepressant does, except it works through the natural channels that are already built into your brain, and it increases your happiness naturally. But I do not generally recommend either St. John's wort or 5-HTP or tryptophan because you can do other things that are more effective. Another thing you can do, and we're getting towards the end of the list here, is gluten. Gluten sometimes causes depression. It can sometimes cross the blood-brain barrier. It leads to inflammation that causes depression. Blood sugar spikes. So if you have spikes and troughs of your blood sugar, this can lead to mood changes. A microbiome analysis. So we talked about helminth therapy. Another thing you can do is look at your bacteria, not symbiotic intestinal worms, but the symbiotic bacteria in your system. You can measure those using a company called Viome in the States that does a microbiome analysis. You can add, they will tell you if you need to add something to your microbiome, a new bacteria. They will tell you what foods to eat, what foods to avoid to make your health as optimum as possible. They will also recommend supplements. So it's another thing you can consider doing. Another thing is talk therapy. Talk therapy is often quite effective. Talk therapy is more effective than the average person who goes to their doctor just wanting a pharmaceutical, and the doctor is trained to give out pharmaceuticals. But if you go to talk to a psychologist, talking to a psychologist is more effective than you would think it would be, based on how few people go to see a psychologist today. So consider doing talk therapy. It's more effective than many people think. Now, a segue from talk therapy to psychological shifts you can make to improve your happiness throughout your life and to prevent depression. So this is all taken from a famous best-selling book. These are all things you can do to foster a positive outlook and empower yourself to make changes and to take control of your life and lead it in the direction you want it to go. And actually, One of the causes of depression is feeling helpless. So if you do not feel helpless, if you feel like you have agency over your life and you can do things to make a difference in the world and make a difference in your life and your family and your community, if you have that self-empowerment, then you're less likely to get depressed. That goes into point number 1 here, meaningful goals. If you have meaningful goals that will lead to something positive, that will make you happy. Meaningful social connections, point number 2. If you have friends and family who reciprocate love and understanding and pull you up in your life, meaningful social connections, and share a joke or two, you can kid around with them, that's important to overcoming depression. Point number 3, overcoming childhood trauma. If you can overcome your childhood trauma and realize that people were acting sometimes as best they could, sometimes not as best they could, but it was what happened. If you can overcome your childhood trauma, you will be happier. Imagining a positive future. So this is important for me to avoid depression myself, as I try to imagine the best future I can and try and make that future into reality. So I do various actions to try and increase the chances of that future coming about. So that makes me happier. Being valued by society. Maybe you're not going to necessarily be valued by the whole of society, but if you can be valued by the people you interact with on a daily basis, your friends, your family, your co-workers, your community, and if you can be a part of society and give to society, then you will be valued by society, and hopefully that is another strategy you can use to make yourself have less risk of getting depressed. Another thing you can do is connections with nature. If you connect with nature, if you forest bathe, if you get some sun, we went through that already, your risks of depression is much less. So psychological shifts are important, exercise is important, light therapy is important, getting sun, getting vitamin D, curcumin, SAMe, magnesium, all of these things I've mentioned will help you achieve the best life that you can actualize, hopefully, will be achieved if you can overcome your depression. So, thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it useful. I hope you take away some methods for you to overcome depression. I should mention that if you are on an SSRI, I did say 46% of people have severe reactions to quitting an SSRI. If you're in the States, Lyle from Alternative to Meds lists some ways of overcoming SSRIs, and he actually has an in-clinic treatment program in the States that's very effective in reducing your dose of an SSRI. And I believe he achieved something like 78% successfully withdrawn patients from an SSRI. It does cost a lot of money though. So try withdrawing without seeing Lyle. Some of his tips are on his website, so you can consider looking into that a little bit. And I will be making a video on withdrawing from medication subsequently to this video. Maybe not the next video, but it will be coming up. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I hope you found it informative. I hope you learned something. I hope you will continue to learn things throughout your life. And I will let you go. Thanks for watching, and good night.